Hi and welcome to this second session of the hybrid HiPo. Those who have missed out on the first session, I'll be putting up an link, or you can look it at the description below. I would suggest and request that you first go through that first, so that you are able to gain a proper insight, as we will be cross-referencing the first video on and off as we discuss. Now, in the first part, we discussed about the factors which are important to determine potential, right? And hence how to integrate it per se in the organization. And of course, a few of the benefits and global practices which are associated with it. Today we wanted to talk a bit further and be a bit more specific with regard to HiPo identification as an exercise. So when we talk of hybrid, and we have spoken about this earlier also, there are 5 key factors to be noted for identifying a HiPo. Now, one of the first things is the purpose. We have to understand that a HiPo exercise is not a performance exercise, right? So the first, and often people miss out on that it's not an exercise in performance, which means that it has nothing to do with how you performed in the last year and so on and so forth. Often people do take in previous performance as a factor and so on and so forth. No, the idea is to look at potential, which means to look at the capabilities within and how they could be put in line with org objectives. So the first thing is the gap identification, which means that considering a certain standard, right? Are there a few people, or are there those unique personalities who are above the edge, right, in terms of gap identification? So that's number one. Number 2 is the tools. Now, when you're doing a HiPo identification, as we said, that you need a hybrid mix because of the subjective versus objective. So hence, keep in mind that you need to have a competency framework, or use some kind of a competency framework like the one we have, which is not only helpful in creating that scale or using it as a tool for measurement purposes, but also helping as a yardstick. Because without a yardstick, what could happen is that we could be completely reliant on the human bias, and that's the third part of it, which is the measure part. The important, so one of the clear distinctions which is often not drawn out by assessors is this whole gap between org versus self. I could have a lot of potential which primarily could be helpful to me as a person. Like I often talk about the 2 types of personalities that we carry: the persona we carry at the workplace versus the as a person in society, and there are distinct differences. For example, let me take the case of a judge. When the judge is sitting on the anointed chair to decide on cases, he leaves aside his nature of care, empathy, and decides the case based on the merits, right? Similarly, so there are workplace competencies and there are personal competencies. This distinction needs to be very clearly drawn out and often gets missed out in a HiPo exercise, especially when you are measuring against established objectives of the organization or company, right? Okay, let's move to the next one, which is the factor of transparency. Now, when you have a hybrid HiPo model, one of the gains you have is the factor of transparency, because when you put them through a test, which is say for example like ours at pexitest.com, which is online, what happens is there's no one meddling in how you are being scored. It's a algorithm based scoring, so hence you are being measured against a similar yardstick with your peer. So you are assured of transparency. How do we do the assessment center transparency? Again, here often we find that typically assessors are brought in from outside, which is third-party assessors, to bring in absolute neutrality, but there could be a small chip or a small missing link over there. Look, an external assessor will not be aware of the culture of the organization, and it is very important to understand the cultural factor and its weight, its influence and its impact on the people within the organization. Hence, it is always advisable that within the team of assessors, always include someone from within the organization. However biased it might be, you always know that you can offset that bias by the use of two other or one other neutral assessor, right? Second thing, that in the scoring methodology, when you are trying to score the person finally, include all biases. So what will happen? One bias will ride over another bias. Now, often people suggest, okay, can we do one thing, that if there are 3 assessors, can we divide their scores as a 30% weightage, a 30% weightage and a 40% weightage? No, never do that. What would happen is, you do not know that the weightage you have offered to the person with 40%, how much of bias they are going to bring into the results. So which means add their results. However, in an hybrid mechanism, when you are doing the measurement, it is important that you lay the various kind of weightages, which means that if there's a competency test that you have administered, you can always put in, say for example, a 40% weightage to it. If you have certain kind of a psychometric tool like we have, which we call as the 4i test, which helps in putting people into one of the 4 quadrants, that could have a 30% weightage, and you could put another 30% weightage to the assessment center itself, or vice versa. You could change the dimensions and put 40% weightage to the assessment center and 30% weightage to the other online test. That way, what you are doing is that while you are bringing in the whole scores of bias into it, but because of the weightages, you are limiting its impact into the final score. Get it? Okay. Now, to have a very standard yardstick. And this yardstick need not be very confusing, but it should be very, very clear. What are you out to measure? Typically, what we do is we measure these 4 things. We look at your personal discipline, your focus and attention, your team management capabilities, and your prioritization or time management capabilities. We feel that when you look at these 4 factors, your ability to focus deep, your ability to manage people, manage groups, your ability to add value through prioritization, and your ability to manage time are the 4 qualities you would require to draw out more, given all other parameters are equal, right? Finally, the final part of an HiPo is the continuity or the blending with performance. Look, when we done a HiPo, how do we ensure that people are enthused by it? People are not worried by it, or people are not, to ensure that there is enough excitement even post the exercise, is not only to share the results, but also to ensure that they go in through a session of further learning, further improvement, which of course is one of the factors of motivation. Plus, other people should also know their scores, and that will help others also to be enthused about becoming a future HiPo, and hence spreading the message across. Which means that when you roll out the scores, when you roll out the numbers, don't keep it limited only to the people who have been in the HiPo, but roll it across the board. That way what would happen is other people who would be interested in this would be curious, would want to get nominated, and hence would put in their best performance, right? That's a great gain for the organization. I hope this has really helped you. We help conduct hybrid HiPo assessments for all kind of organizations to help you out and your organization out, your teams out, and really reflect on what potentials they hold for the future. With this, I would end this session. Thank you so much for your attention, and do spread the word if you have liked what you heard, and do reach out to me and to our team at pexitics.com for further information.